It's cyberpunk, but for 5th edition? Not really. This is a review of Crystalpunk. Let's dive in. So here we have the Crystalpunk campaign guide. Let's go ahead and flip it over to the back. Welcome to a magic-fueled future. Welcome to a world where your personal sidearm uses your body's mana as ammo and a vicious demon fuels the engine of your brand new ride. It's a world where spellslingers and mercenaries fight side by side against nightmarish monsters in the streets while corporate cults are blinded by their pursuit of wealth and power. It's a world where every resource is pushed to its limits using arcane technology. When you die, not even your soul is safe. Mana fuels this ever-advancing society, and there is no richer source than the soul of a humanoid. This world is also one of opportunity and vicious beauty. It's a place of complex mysteries, unimaginable heists, exotic, dangerous locations, and death-defying battles. It's a place where risk-takers can truly thrive and where action hides behind every corner. This is Crystalpunk. Let's take a look at the inside covers blank, which is some missed opportunities, as we'll see with the maps later on. But I will say, I actually really do like this title splash. I mean, that art right there is looking pretty rad. So this book is divided into 3 different parts, with a brief introduction into the world of Aysta, which is the continent that this whole setting takes place on. First, you have the character creation, which gives new races, 2 new classes, subclasses for every original class, with the exception of Artificer, new backgrounds, equipment, feats, and spells. The second part is about the land and the lore of Aysta and everything you need to know about how technology and magic functions and are integrated. The last part of this book are things that the GM is going to need to know in order to run a successful game. And these include a couple new rulings, as well as stats for some new NPCs, mercenaries, monsters, and nightmares. But before I dive into the introduction, I will point out that the artwork throughout this book is absolutely superb. And as I flip through this book, not only will you see it, but you'll also see how stylish some portions of the layout are. There are these little reports and interviews that give some flavor to the world, and for me, it isn't really necessary. I don't really dig all of that stuff, but for some it might actually help with immersion. And so, without further ado, welcome to Crystalpunk. This serves as a brief introduction into the world of Aysta, or Crystalpunk. This is more of something to allow your players to read without getting spoiled on specific things. For example, this is a terrible world. Aysta is a cutthroat place full of tough choices and dangerous situations where there is almost never a right answer. It's got that punk attitude. Technology is fueled by magic. It's futuristic fantasy. It's also got this neo-noir mystery kind of thing that can go with it. Beliefs can become real, and that's actually integral to the actual setting itself. Nightmares haunt the streets, also integral to the system or the setting. Exotic and dangerous locations, as we'll see later on in chapter 2, and there are some new roles and new races. So we get some a brief history here, some of the common languages, as well as some of the exotic languages, as well as some of the new languages that are introduced into this campaign setting. I like the simplification of the currency. It really comes down to either chips of gem pieces, or CP, or full gem pieces, which are GP. So you only really have CP or GP. Although there can be some variety of rarer gems that are priced more. So think of like all the rare gems that you can find in something like a treasure hoard in Dungeons and Dragons. I think the most important section in this entire chapter, but as a GM and as a player to get a grasp on, is how arcane technology works. So as a player, and even as a GM, you're going to have to do a little bit of legwork to come up with ways to mold magic to look a little bit techy. Aysta's technology is powered entirely by magic. It has become a futuristic world without the use of electricity or computers. Tasks, large and small, are performed by spells or arcane devices, and magic is extremely common wherever you go. This section provides a brief overview of how Aysta's magical technology functions. So everything is powered by mana. Spells are basically the technology here. and everything is also kind of fueled by arcane crystal. Arcane crystals are special, magically infused crystals that are used to draw and manipulate mana from a user. You have things called infernal engines, which are captured demons that are put into these engines, and that kind of powers like your vehicles and other bits of machinery and things like that. I also like that you get some of these random tables, like these are some of the spells that you might see in the city, like floating structures or doors without doorknobs and things like that. Arcane devices, some magical citizens that you might come across. There's Manatech spell service and their costs, so cantrips, although those can be done for free or at least for 2 GP, all the way up to 5th level spells. The last part of this specific chapter are just things that are going to happen in the other parts of the book, like character options, where to find creatures and stat blocks, some of the locations and world buildings and things like that, as well as optional rules. So that's actually it for the introduction. Let us get into the character creation and all the new features therein. This section represents everything a player needs in order to create a character in the Crystalpunk setting. It offers details on what life is like, new races and how old races fit in, new classes and how they fit in, new subclasses, new backgrounds, new equipment, new feats, and new spells. Now, something that I've not really mentioned before, but this book is meant to serve as the campaign guide. So that means new stuff to fit into this world, but you're still going to need like the player's guide from 5th edition or at least the basic SRD in order to play. It's also mentioned that if you're playing Crystalpunk, then you're going to want to use their backgrounds and equipment options rather than stuff from the base game. So just to kind of throw that out there so that you're aware of. Something that is actually a common theme throughout this entire book is the use of random tables, and I actually really dig that. These tables can be as simple as names and titles to a little bit more complex, such as how certain historical events have played out, and we'll see that a little bit later in Chapter 2. I like the inclusion of the random lore tables as it really makes the world unique and your own. Of course, you don't have to use random tables. You can always create your own. The fact of the matter still remains. Some events are left vague to allow the GM the freedom to make the game unique. There are 9 new races introduced into Crystalpunk. The core races are all still here, but their sections are more to inform the player as to how they fit into the world of Crystalpunk, as opposed to just giving out like all the stats for them. So if you want their stats, look in the player's handbook. I will also mention that the races are in alphabetical order, but I honestly would have much preferred it if the old races were set after the new ones, just because of how different the two layouts actually are. So the new races are Battleborn. The Battleborn are tough, mutated warriors created by the Shattered Empire to fight brutal wars. They are often mistaken as tieflings. I mean, they honestly look alike, and they come in 3 different varieties: brutes, scouts, and defenders, depending on how they function during the war. Beast folk are a race of animal humanoid hybrids that come in many different varieties. The overgrowth is their ancestral homeland. I think this is a fantastic idea, that to have anthropomorphic animal races. I mean, I really love Humblewood and how that is all detailed, but it seems like this was included for the sake of being included. Like, I can't even remember seeing any artwork at all of what a beast folk could look like in this entire book. And actually, now that I think about it, I think there's like one picture, and that's later on in the evolutionist section. But that's the only one that I can honestly remember. The Curseborn are an anomalous race tainted by the void. Each is afflicted by a powerful curse which manifests differently in each individual. Eternals are an ancient race of undead with mysterious origins who can transfer between vessels to live forever. And here's an example of having a random table of some sort of a historical event and how it can be tailored to your campaign. So the origin of Eternals. So either a powerful necromancer attempted to raise an army from the dead, but instead turned their entire home city, including themselves, into undead. or an ancient group of people participated in a ritual to grant them eternal life. They got their wish, but it erased their memories and turned them into undead in exchange. A now dead god attempted to bring their consciousness into this world, and it was instead split among corpses, raising them as eternals. Or an intense burst of magical necromantic warfare was used against the now ruined city, transforming them all into eternal undead. So I really like how some of these options can be really different from one another, and it can really give your unique or your game some sort of a unique little tidbit there. The Nephilim are angelic humanoids who garner traits from their celestial heritage. And really, that's kind of all I have to say about that. Nomads are curious, planar explorers with bodies made up of floating crystals. Now, if you've ever played 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, they kind of vaguely resemble the shard mines, and that's actually really cool. Soul-fueled are soul-powered constructs manufactured for a variety of different purposes. These are the magic robots of Crystalpunk. Probably one of the more unique races, or I guess it's not really a race, but concept is the split soul. Split souls are a pair of humanoids who have begun to share a soul after a special event. Now, 2-player characters must choose this race, and they are then linked permanently. So all the good things and all the bad things that come with that are included therein. So have fun with that. The Unwoken are a ghostly race thought to have imagined the world itself, now materializing as a representation of their own thoughts. So those are your 9 new races. While the classes function the same from the core, they have been updated to fill the Crystalpunk world. Some of the classes, such as the Barbarian, have new option features, and every class, however, has new subclass or archetype. So, for example, the Barbarian has a new Barbarian feature called the Shotgun Slayer, and they also have something called Armor Defense. Barbarians also get the Path of the Curse, a malicious presence within their body which fuels their rage. Bards get the College of Momentum, and the best that I can describe it is that they're just simply mobile DJs. Clerics get the Missionary Domain, which seems pretty basic. They're just simply spreading the word of their deity, which is kind of something all clerics should be doing anyways, but in Crystalpunk, it actually plays a significant role when you remember that instead of corporations, you have religious cults that are fueled by the beliefs of their followers. Druids have the Circle of Crystals, which allows them to manipulate or create crystals to protect others or to channel their spells. Fighters get the Weapon Forger, which allows them to mod their equipment, and there's actually quite a few number of mods to implement into your weapons. Monks get the Way of the Streets, and simply put, instead of training in a monastery, they learned how to fight on the streets or in underground arenas. Paladins get the Oath of Rebellion, which may seem odd for a class devoted to loyalty and good virtues, but the Oath of Rebellion seeks to fight against oppression. Rangers get the Infernal Rider, and although instead of an animal, they get a cycle from which they can ride around on and attack from. Rogues get the Quick Draw archetype, and they get bonuses to attacking first in combat. Sorcerers get the Nightmare Origin, which is the manifestation of a nightmare personified. Each incarnation provides some sort of a benefit while also giving bonus spells at 1st and 3rd levels, at least. Additionally, you can morph into any of these incantations, and you can do so almost at any time. Like, you can switch back and forth between some of those incantations, so you're actually not stuck with that one. Warlocks get the Lost Soul Patron, a soul that has been lost in the ethereal plane and wanders the place between life and death. And wizards get Infiltration Magic, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You're just a wizard spy, which is actually pretty cool. Additionally, there are 2 new classes to choose from, the Evolutionists and the Soul Shapers. Simply put, Evolutionists mod their bodies in one of 3 ways. Innovation, think of it as magic cybernetics. Mutations, well, the description goes out of its way to point out that these mutations can be from alchemy, curses, or some sort of a parasite. The actual narrative and mechanics are explained as though you change your body with alchemy, and so, yeah. And then there's infusion, where your changes come through the use of pure magic. Now, your mutations can be overcharged through the use of metabolic ignition. And there are a plethora of upgrades to actually choose from. You have basic upgrades, arm upgrades, core upgrades, exterior upgrades, growth upgrades, head upgrades, and leg upgrades. So, very neat on that idea. Then you have soul shapers. And soul shapers are those who can see the souls of the living and the dead and can manipulate them. They usually get these abilities through a near-death experience. To me, this seems a little lackluster as it's just another spellcasting class, and there are 4 different disciplines to choose from. You have the discipline of soothsaying. The soothsayer is able to eventually summon spirits, like at level 15. The discipline of witchcraft is the witchcraft has a familiar and spells that dig into being a witch or necromancer. There's really nothing special there. The discipline of manifestation is able to summon their own soul as an ethereal guardian to fight for them. And the discipline of soul blades is able to conjure soul blades. I mean, basically your fighter subclass that is also able to cast spells. Because of how different thematically Cyberpunk or Crystalpunk is from your standard fantasy game, it is recommended that you use the setting's backgrounds. And there's quite a few number of backgrounds, like your academic, your artist, celebrity, cultist, criminal, dealer, detective, driver, explorer, fixer, law enforcement, mana slave, media, mechanic, mercenary, medic, punk, runner, sentinel, shaman, vagrant, vendor, spell worker. The equipment has been upgraded to be in line with the cyber fantasy theme, and there are some changes concerning dwarf weaponry and armor and elven weaponry, which is actually explained here. Something that I think the setting does very well is explain the use of guns, and simply put, guns use a person's mana. Additionally, spellcasters can use something like a channeling rifle, and the channeling rifle allows a spellcaster to quote-unquote shoot their spells. So this basically acts as a staff, a rod, or a wand. So what about the more mundane items that you can find? Phones and things like that. Well, they still exist, but within the cyber fantasy style this game tries to emulate. For example, a cell phone would be called a meeting stone, which casts a spell that allows you to cast some sort of illusion that allows you to talk to a holographic form of a person on the other end in real time. In terms of feats, there's really only 4. So we have the evolutionary experimenter. You explore body modifications granting you some benefits. Guns akimbo. You are adept at wielding pistols, allowing you to dual wield them. Rune tech initiate. And then the mana technician. So just ways of gaining or spellcasting abilities, essentially. There are some new spells. Actually, there's quite a few number of new spells. And although nothing really stands out, these are just spells to help meld together cyberpunk and technology and fantasy and things like that. Also to make it a little bit easier to explain some of the tech that's here. So let's get into the actual lore and the world of Aysta. Chapter 2 is all about the default world for Crystalpunk. And there is actually a nice map of the continent of Aysta. I honestly wish that this was on the inside cover. Like, it's just perfect for just being on the inside cover, and yet there's nothing on the inside cover. And the reason why I say that is because this is in the middle of the book. And so I'm often probably going to be searching for either this map or the map of Prismatic Falls, which is the mega city that players are probably going to be finding adventures in. So that means I'll be searching for this map quite often, and it'll be a hassle, unless I print it off. But still, it's like a 2-pager, so printing it off is going to be a major pain. Anyways, there are 6 main locations on the continent. So you have Prismatic Falls in the Federation, and Prismatic Falls is the mega city where it's basically equivalent to Night City for Cyberpunk. also the place where a vast majority of the people on Aysta live, and it's not such a great place to live. Then you have Soul Space. So Soul Space is the name given to the area of the ethereal plane that lies adjacent to Prismatic Falls. You have the Shattered Empire. The Shattered Empire is an arcane kingdom plagued by civil war and internal squabbles that obstruct the restoration of its former glory. You have the Scorching Frontier, which is demon-infested desert at the forefront of demon hunting efforts, where cowboys duel and outlaws roam. The Overgrowth is an impossibly massive jungle that holds the mysteries of an ancient civilization. It is also the ancestral homeland of all the beast folks. And then the Frost, which is an icy wasteland to the very north where there are mountains and things like that. You get nice explanation about how the planes work and where the ethereal plane kind of sits into that. And then we actually have the history of Aysta. So the cults are based in Prismatic Falls, but what exactly is their goal? Well, you see, some time ago, after the cults took over the government, there was an event called the Ethereal Break, and thoughts and beliefs and fears from the people of Aysta began to leak into the world and become real, and that's actually when the gods were born. Of course, the cult did everything they could to hide it, and it wasn't until 100 years later that a revolutionary exposed the cult's secrets to the people of Aysta. So I really like that the history of Aysta is steeped in mystery. Like, we don't know specifically who leaked that information, who's the whistleblower, or like who the wanderer god is, or why they've been stricken from the annals of history or anything like that. I actually really like that. It gives the GM some room to maneuver and actually make a campaign that could be about things like that. Essentially, though, this chapter takes what was in the introduction chapter and expands on it. So, for example, like the magical technology, you're going to have things like that are actually spelled out in greater detail. So, cantrip fingers, for example. Cantrip fingers are just these little, like, I wouldn't say mechanical, but magically cybernetic fingers that are able to cast cantrips, which seems really odd, but I mean, that is a thing here. And so you get a lot of detail about things like that, what advertising looks like and how people communicate, which is all done through magic, although it looks like, to our eyes, it'll look like, super advanced technology and things like that. There are actually some greater details on the 7 cults here and how or where they function. And so you have, let's see, I'll start with the contractor. The contractor is what you typically associate with a corporation, and they are the business dealers, and they believe in logic and truth above all else. The handmaiden is seen as the most benevolent of the gods, and they deal with family, disease prevention, and harvest. The knight is the god of mercenaries, and I don't think anything more needs to be said about that. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then you have the kingmaker, who's the god of entertainment and misinformation. Rogues and rebels and gangs tend to follow the kingmaker. The minstrel is the god of romance, trust, and also annihilation. Yeah, all those things go together. They also believe that war should be won with information, assassination, and carefully selected confrontation. The reveler is the god of celebrations, good humor, and camaraderie. Followers of the reveler often implant excessive amounts of magic tech to enhance their physical abilities or perception of the world. Then you have the wanderer, which is the secret god that was once thought to have been destroyed by the cults. The wanderer is the god of rebels, the poor, and life's ever-shifting wheel. There are also a few other religions that are spelled out here in Aysta, such as the Siblings of the Sky, the Creed of the Frontier, the One, and the Solidarity. And these are the religions that you would find outside of Prismatic Falls. The rest of this chapter is about Prismatic Falls and the other locations in Aysta. And once again, I really do like the maps that are presented here. I just wish that they were in a more optimal location, like one of the inside covers, or at least in the very front of the book or the very back of the book. But this is another instance of where you're going to have to be hunting for this specific page, or print it off to show your players, or at least bookmark it. So each of the sectors in Prismatic Falls is ruled by a different cult. And it has its own style and the way it looks and the way it functions. And those cults also have a base of operations, some sort of a church or some sort of a attraction that, the people will flock to. Something that is very interesting that really does deserve some thought is how hacking works, or what it even looks like or functions like here in Crystalpunk. And since everything, including technology, is based on magic, hacking is simply about dispelling whatever effects enhance that item. And things like the Matrix or cyberspace is completely different. Instead, we get soul space, which is the area over prismatic falls in the ethereal plane. I'm actually not a big fan of this explanation, although I will admit that it does make some sort of sense in the way that Crystalpunk works. Put lightly, hacking and other things that you'd expect from cyberpunk don't really exist. You could influence the material plane from soul space with a rather difficult, successful arcana or religion check. And soul space, the best that I could really describe it is like in Ghost in the Shell, wherever they have a meeting in like cyberspace and they jack in and you see them like sitting around and they're just talking. It's kind of like that. In soul space, you can fly around, you can meet anywhere, you can look however you want. I guess this would be like a better form of communication in some respects, but honestly, I'm not that big of a fan of it. While Prismatic Falls is the biggest city in Aysta, it's also not the only one. There's actually a few other nations for adventures to take place in, like the Iron Fist. The Iron Fist is the most important nation in the Empire, where the permanent residents are actually soul fueled, so think of that's actually kind of scary. The Ardent Shield is a nation of traders and sailors with rivalry with the Crimson Blade. And the Crimson Blade are often seen as the evil nation because, well, they kind of started this whole war in the first place. The Ebon Stone is an underground nation run by dwarves. The Violet Flame are a series of floating islands run by monks. The Verdant Arrow is a sect of elves who are all about druidic magic, and the Azure Spark is kind of like the opposite. They're another sect of elves who are all about magitech. The Scorching Frontier is a desert landscape where demons roam about, only to be captured for infernal machines. And then the Overgrowth, where is a land devoured by wildlife, where magic is strong and chaotic. It is believed that the precursors lived there. Overall, I think there's a nice variation of lands, although I find that each location is brief in the details. I'm not a big fan of this layout specifically, or at least in this entire chapter, because it's just basic and there's a lot of text. It's just walls upon walls of text here. And I found myself checking out the multiple times I've actually read through these sections on my own. So, yeah. Anyways, let's go to Chapter 3, Running Crystalpunk. I do like this opening where a GM is pointed to the different sections of this book, even though it seems like common sense. So, for example, you can learn about the continent of Aysta, go to Chapter 2, introduce your players to the world, choose the rules that you want to adapt for your game, or introduce your players to the new character options, start with the simple mission, and then go from there. There's also a little bit of a world primer. This is something that you would give to your players to kind of get them in the mood for this Crystalpunk game. There are a few changes to the rules when playing Crystalpunk. Survival is replaced with navigation, and animal handling is replaced with streetwise. And then you also have some skills that need adjusting. So Arcana now includes information related to magical technology and how it functions. History now includes general knowledge as well as information related to military, logistics, economics, and politics. Nature now includes information related to geography, biology, food, poisons, and narcotics. Religion now includes information related to the cults of Prismatic Falls and their activities. Intimidation now includes attempting to keep your cool when threatened. For example, when two characters confront each other, you can have them make a contested charisma intimidation check to see who backs down first. Resting has a major change. So short rests are now between 10 minutes to 8 hours long. A character can only gain the benefits of a short rest twice before needing to take a long rest. However, a long rest is now at least 5 days long. I'm actually a little bit conflicted on this new ruling. On one hand, it seems major hardcore, and I dig it, but you'll have to really think about the structure of your adventures to pull it off. Now, on the flip side, it does promote downtime activities, which is always a plus. Characters now have a number of magic item slots equal to 2 plus their actual level, and this includes consumables, which I don't really like. In addition, the rarity of an item dictates how many slots are required to actually, commune with it or include it into your magic item slot number. The game tries to do something unique with giving bonuses to dice called edge dice. While good in concept, even in its most basic form as we see here, I don't think it really fits 5th edition, as we already have advantage and disadvantage. Basically, edge dice is if you have some sort of a bonus or an edge during a roll, such as cover, you roll an additional d4 and add that to the total. Now, we've been seeing this kind of a thing happening in recently released games. For example, Power Rangers has done it. It's pretty static here. It's just a d4. Whereas in games like Power Rangers and I believe Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you can actually upgrade those dice. So from a d4 to a d6 or to a d8 to a d12, I think is the max that they usually go to. And then you would add that total to that roll, depending on how specialized you are in whatever it is that you're doing. So I don't really care for the edge dice rules here because we already have advantage and disadvantage. There are rules for vehicles, and you know what? It kind of works. I really like how simplistic it is. It doesn't need to be overly complicated at all. The only thing is there's only 5 vehicles statted, which, I mean, I guess so. You got a common car, a sports car, an arcane cycle, a heavy utility vehicle, and a hover car. This kind of encompasses everything that you'd expect to, come across. I just kind of want some more flashy things, which I guess you could really take one of these and make it your own. You have ideas for creating missions, which is always a good thing to include. And actually, shout out to this playlist that they included here. I have actually yet to listen to it, but that's actually really cool because a lot of these games, like Cyberpunk, they have that attitude or that certain mood that you want to encompass, and hopefully this playlist actually sets that home. So again, I have not listened to it yet, so take that with a grain of salt. The last part of this book are example mercenaries and monsters, or your NPCs. While there are some varieties to the mercenaries and the monsters, I noticed that these all fall under the CR10 range. Now, you do have nightmares, like living nightmares, and these are bigger, badder monstrosities that can actually go all the way up to CR20. And you can also create your own or tinker with the stats and abilities. And that is actually it for the Crystalpunk campaign setting. So for my final thoughts, I do like to categorize them into 4 different categories from core gameplay, artwork, layout, and content. So let's start with the core gameplay. If you're not a fan of 5th edition, then I doubt this is going to be up your alley. There are some subtle changes in terms of 2 of the skills and the changes to short and long rests, which still kind of baffle me a little bit. You're either going to love it or hate it. On one hand, this change does promote downtime activities, but if you're looking for something a little bit more fast-paced, it'd be better if you just stuck with the original rulings for resting. I like the change to weapons and things like the channeling rifle, which allow you to shoot your spells. Overall, I'd actually give this a D12. Artwork. The artwork is fantastic. It really does set the mood for what Crystalpunk aims to be, and there's just enough of it. And I'm actually going to go ahead and lump the fact that they included a playlist in here to kind of set the mood, and so that's actually going to get a D20 for me. The layout. The layout for the very beginning of the book is fantastic. It looks very stylish and things are easy to read. It grabs my attention and it just doesn't let go. By the second chapter, things have a more mundane look, and there's just walls upon walls of text. And I wish the maps were in a more optimal location, either in the inside covers or, at the very least, at the very beginning or the end of the book. The layout is going to get a D12 from me. The content. Crystalpunk gives you an introduction into its setting. There's a lot of information on how the PCs live in this world, which is needed because this is a wholly unique idea that I've never seen before. Some of the locations are well detailed, while others are not. It's these locations that I wish had a little bit more depth to them, although at the same time, it gives the GMs the freedom to kind of just run with it however they want. The types of mission for each of these locations is actually welcome, but I also find the lack of some sort of a starter adventure sorely missing. It would have been nice to have some sort of a actual adventure to introduce to your players and help them really nail the setting. Soul Space, for example, if they had an introductory adventure that really helped to set how Soul Space works and what you can do therein, that would have been a big help. There are some varieties in mercenaries and monsters, but only the nightmarish offer a higher challenge rating. So take that as you will. I'm going to give the content a D12. So that is it for Crystalpunk. This is, in my opinion, a very unique idea. When I backed this on Kickstarter all those years ago, I thought it was just going to be Cyberpunk, but with 5th edition attached to it. And this turned out to be something different. Am I disappointed? No, not really. I mean, it was my own expectations that kind of got in the way. But this tries to meld fantasy with technology. And that is something I've not really seen, although the tech is kind of non-existent. Everything is done with magic anyways, so take that as you will. Feel free to leave a comment down below, give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and subscribe if you would like to see more. I will see you guys in the next video.